Hello again. I've been reading with utter and complete astonishment a piece published on the BBC website, to which I give a link in the description to this video. I also watched a BBC programme on Sunday which covered the same material. I will quote from the written article because this will be easier for viewers to check and make sure that I'm being perfectly accurate in what I say. Essentially, it is being claimed that there are hardly any black people or Indians in skiing and that this is probably due to racism. The solution would be to set targets to increase the number of black people involved in skiing and snowboarding. Before we examine the claims made on this subject, I wish to point out one absolutely awful lie which the author of the article tells. He writes that the Windrush generation essentially became urbanised, forced into large cities, and in the process losing an understanding and emotional attachment with the natural world. And he repeated this monstrous claim on television. The people who came to Britain from the Caribbean in the 1950s chose to do so because they thought they could earn more and have a better standard of living here than they could in Trinidad or Jamaica. Nobody asked them to come. They simply booked tickets and turned up in Britain seeking work. The idea that young men from Jamaica were forced to leave their homes, often in rural districts, and move to London's Notting Hill district in the 1950s is preposterous. The fact that so many did so, and in the process lost an understanding and emotional attachment with the natural world, was a completely free choice which they made. To claim that they were forced to move to Britain's large cities is a falsehood. Having got that out of the way, what else is said? To solve the so-called problem of the lack of black skiers, it is suggested that the barriers for black and brown people start at grassroots level and, in my opinion, owe much to questions of acceptance and belonging in rural spaces. If by this the author means that black people are made unwelcome in the countryside, that's nonsense. The man who wrote this dreadful piece puts forward no evidence at all for this belief. At any rate, we are simply expected to take his word for this state of affairs. He is not optimistic about the prospect of seeing black skiers, saying, "To find ourselves in 2021 with zero data around ethnic participation and with no published targets or timelines, I consider myself justified in feeling cautious." Published targets and timelines. This means deciding that by a certain year, 15% of British skiers will be black or Asian. This is what I meant when I mentioned quotas. The idea is that skiing and snowboarding should be subject to racial balancing. Why? Because any sport that wants to remain relevant and hold its own on the world stage, attracting big cash sponsors, needs to commit to adapting to the changing makeup of the UK. Practically everything in this article and the television programme which covered the same ground is utterly bonkers. From Jamaicans being forced to live in Notting Hill to the idea of quotas for black snowboarders, it sounds like the ramblings of someone from another planet. Why do people from Africa and the Caribbean really have no interest in skiing and snowboarding and no desire to take up these sports? It's easy enough to answer this by looking at the medals awarded in the Olympic Games since 1948 for skiing and slalom. I give a link to these winners in the description to this video. Let's have a look now at the nationalities of these people. Austrian and Swiss mainly. There are also people from Norway, France and Italy, and some from Canada and the United States. Not one from Africa or the Caribbean, which is a little disturbing. Perhaps this too is evidence of racial prejudice. But wait a moment. Perhaps there's another reason why people from Austria and Switzerland are more likely to take up skiing and snowboarding than Nigerians or Jamaicans. I wonder if it might have something to do with coming from countries with lots of snow-covered mountains. Canada has those as well, doesn't it? I may be wrong, and I admit I haven't checked up on the figures, but I'd be willing to bet that snorkeling and scuba diving are more popular in the Caribbean than they are in Switzerland and Austria. Is that because those sports exhibit prejudice against people from Central Europe? Or is it something to do with the environment in those countries? I cannot tell viewers how irritated I was by this article and television programme, which is, I admit, par for the course for the BBC these days. For people in Britain, skiing is an expensive hobby, which normally requires trips to the Alps and so on. I suspect that most black people choose to do other things with their money, and that's why skiing isn't a big thing for them. What do viewers think?